everyone, and welcome to Mental Health Matters with your host, Dr. Matt Gloviak. Thank you so much for being in attendance to this episode. So, with this episode, we're going to pick up where we last left off with guest star. Guest star, I like that. Yes, Dean Andrea Heil from Bolingbrook High School. Andrea, it's really great to have you back on the show. How you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me again.
Good, good. Well, thank you for being on here. It was absolutely fantastic the last episode that we had here. I really think you touched on some important points, when we consider mental health in the schools and the different things we've got going on. So, now we talked about a lot of the different warning signs, things that we can look out for, some of the problems, that can occur in the schools, especially with their adolescents, not only specific to, the neighborhood of Bolingbrook, but just kind of in general across the nation. Now, one of the things I stated in the very beginning is when we had our conversation before we met for the show, I was so impressed with how progressive Bolingbrook High School is. And one of the things that stood out to me is you were talking about having the peace room, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
would you mind telling me a little bit about what the peace room is, when you use it, why it's there? What's a peace room?
So peace rooms they've become pretty common in elementary schools across the country. It's rare to find high schools that have peace rooms. It's something that our dean's office in particular thought was really important. So when students come into the dean's office, obviously there are times that they're quite escalated. And if you have multiple kids and they're escalated for different reasons, it becomes more difficult to de-escalate students because they feed off each other, right? That's human nature. So we had talked at length how we just need another place to take kids in the building that we could really give them a chance to have a break if they needed that break, and researched how a lot of our grade schools in the district have peace rooms. And I just felt like, and my team felt like, why can't we do this at the high school level? So we had a lot of support from our administration. The peace room is exactly how it sounds. It is so wonderful. We have all of our department meetings in there now.
Oh, okay.
Just beautiful colors, comfortable furniture. It's curtained off, so there's what we call a calming corner. That would be for a student who really just needs to get themselves, they're able to sit, they can color, they can sit with music for a few minutes and kind of reset themselves before they return to the classroom. So that's one part of it. The other portion of the room is really to hold groups. So our counselors do a nice job holding grief groups, maybe time management groups, all different kind of groups that assess the needs of our student population. They hold quite a few. Our deans also hold groups, and then we have quite a few counseling agencies that come in. We do run circles in our school for kids where we have speaking pieces and they're able to sit and kind of get their emotions out. So that's done in the peace room. The games we talked about in our last episode, we do a lot of that. We do mediations for students down there, and one of our deans is working pretty actively to bring a peer mediation group to our building so that then peer mediations would be done in the peace room as well. After hours and in lieu of punitive consequences, instead of like a detention where you're just sitting in a room and staring at a wall, we have mindfulness training, we have meditation, we have different types of programs that hopefully give students resiliency and coping skills, so that we don't see repeat behaviors, because a detention staring at a wall is not really teaching the child anything that's going to help them improve their behavior or have a toolbox of skills that can improve it, right? Are you picturing the green wall at the old Bolingbrook High School that we went to?
Oh, goodness.
The room with the green wall.
Yes, you had that. Well, I'll never forget, too. I remember, I was always a kid who was very into school, needed to do well and try to stay out of trouble. And I'll never forget my first week of sixth grade, I got a detention for speaking to my best friend. And, I love this teacher. And if you're watching right now, I love you. But I'll never forget, first week of school, I get a detention for talking to my best friend. And what we did in the detention was we sat in our desk, stared at the wall. There was an X on the overhead projector. We stared at X for a half hour. And, I was fortunate not to get into enough trouble where I, had internal suspension or anything. But remember, I walked past, the dean's office then, and there were the, kind of the office cubicles, just kind of a white wall there, and you would just sit there and stare at the white wall, and that would be it. But you touched on something really important, is how students feed off one another. So maybe, two students get in a verbal altercation, two students in a physical altercation, another student gets caught vaping, another student gets caught for drugs in the school. Now here they all are all in the dean's office and that, and then, they're fighting with one another again, instigates this student, and then everybody just gets really riled up. It's important to be able to have that space where you can de-escalate the situation situation. Because like we were talking about in the last episode, the students aren't mentally equipped, they're not that they have the brain capacity, to necessarily have the coping skills an adult might have, especially if they grow up in a household where, there's inappropriate type of coping skills being utilized, a lot of screaming, physical abuse, drug use, things like that. They don't know how to de-escalate by themselves. So it's very important to have somebody there to help facilitate that. And this peace room sounds like the absolute perfect space to be able to do that. And I appreciate you describing it because I remember I've been to other places. I've been to a psychiatric hospital relatively recently, and I went into the peace room. And there were literally white walls with padding. I was like, is this a peace room or is this more of I don't know what's
Right.
going on here, like the rubber room that you remember from the 1970s or something like that. So very progressive. And have you noticed that this has worked really well with the students?
So I mean, it's really new at the high school. I know that I mean we started it this year, so it's
Oh, it's very new.
very new for us. It's a work in progress. But I mean, when we researched schools that have yoga, mindfulness, meditation, programs like that that really work towards giving students the skill set to be successful in life, um, they've had a drop in behavior, a drop in physical violence, a drop in verbal altercations, an increase in students' attendance as well as academics. So I am looking forward to watching the data. I know in the district at the grade school levels, they have, like I said, rooms like this throughout the elementary schools in our district, and they have had that now for, I believe, 2 to 3 years in most of
Okay.
the buildings, and they've seen a lot of success and a lot of data that supports and matches the research that the district had done to kind of support putting these rooms in place. Kids just I mean it sounds like a timeout, but it isn't because you've got adults there. They're not in a room that's padded and alone. This is something that's guided with an adult. It's all about social skills. It's not about sitting and being alone. It's about working together in a really therapeutic setting. That's the goal, is to provide a therapeutic setting in a school building.
And I think that's fantastic. Now, I'm kind of wondering, so how do we delineate between, therapeutic services, whatever type of program you have at the school, such as using the peace room, versus disciplinary action? I remember when I was a student, you get into trouble, and I was a peer mediator. We were talking about that a little bit, but with the peer mediation process, two students would get caught shoving one another, in the hallway. Wouldn't be a full-blown fight to where it would warrant being suspended from the school, but enough that you would get a referral or maybe an internal suspension. And they would have a choice: either go to the peer mediator and work through this, or you'll have some additional type of consequence, additional detention during your lunches, maybe an external suspension, something like that. Really depending. And it was kind of one of those things where the counseling was punitive, and you would just do it to try to get out of trouble. So how do we delineate the difference here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of a tightrope walk. There, and I think there's confusion on punishment and consequence. And I think that that's something that's really hard to articulate to people. Consequences aren't always negative. So someone's actions, there are consequences for actions. It does not mean it has to be punitive. It just means that there has to be something that's responding to a behavior that we don't like, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something that we don't feel is appropriate for school or isn't appropriate for society. So instead of talking about punishment, which I think is what
One of the more traditional methods.
a very traditional method, we talk about consequences instead. So we look at, obviously there are times that there are things kids are going to do that are unsafe for a school building. And there are times where time and space, I always tell people time and space sometimes really does create and heal a situation. So there are times where it is unsafe for a child to be at school and they do need a break truly from the building because of what occurred. But in that break, you got to work towards kids coming back, doing a reintegration meeting with the family present, really talking about, okay, they're coming back. We got to welcome this kid back. They're part of our community.
Mm-hmm.
They're part of our school, and kind of restoring their, if something happened in a classroom, you got to help that student and that teacher and that class bridge that gap. So we do a lot of work with going into classrooms with a student, creating a situation where they're able to address their peers, where a teacher feels like they've been supported in the classroom and the class can kind of move forward together. So I mean, I think it is a bit of a tightrope dance to try to find kind of that sweet spot where a student knows that, like, I can't just do things wrong and get away with it and get like a high five in a board game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that is not what we're selling
No,
either.
absolutely.
But it's important for students to know that I can make mistakes. I'm an adolescent, and most mistakes I can find redemption from if I'm guided from responsible adults and my family's buying into that. And so it's just kind of finding each individual student, and there is no equation that's perfect for
Mm-hmm.
every situation. It's really kind of being in the gray and learning the family and the student and the situation.
Well, I certainly agree with that wholeheartedly. Like we talked about in our last episode, the social development is equally as important to the learning development, all the book knowledge and things like that that the students are getting out of this. And, having a punishment for the sake of punishment, I'm questioning, does the child really learn from that? So if a child skips school, comes home and the parent finds out about it and the parent just, whips on the child, what's really learned in that entire type of experience? Like, well, clearly it makes my parent upset and, I'll go to school so I don't get beaten again. But what is the life lesson outside of that that really helps? The same thing with going in and, staring at the white wall or the green room, things like that. It's okay, it's punitive. I'd rather, I guess, avoid the bad behavior so I don't have to sit here and stare at the green wall while the rest of my peers are having lunch or going to gym or playground, whatever types of thing, playground, high school. But, like that type of thing, what is the lesson learned? And that's so important in how we teach. It's important that we do that. But like you said, it's a thin tightrope that you're walking on, because at the same time too, we don't want students thinking, oh well, I can get away with anything. I can shove this kid down from the top
Right.
stair, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the dean's office, be in the peace room, and hey, I get to play Battleship. I mean, sure, I'll keep
Right.
doing it.
So, I mean, obviously, yeah, exactly. A variety of behaviors require a variety of consequences, and those are different. So, we're talking about physical violence. The peace room may be the place where you de escalate. The peace room may be the place where, when you return to school, you're assigned there for multiple times a week to work on your anger or work on your ability to, as some kids say, well, I just went red. Well,
Mm-hmm.
work on your ability to not go red, because that's not
Mm-hmm.
going to suit you well the rest of your life. But the peace room isn't going to be the only consequence to something like that. Like the peace room is the restorative piece. It's the part where we're trying to assist the student and support the student and grow the student. But there's also going to be a consequence in a situation like that also supports the student who maybe felt like they were victimized, or supports students who witnessed this in their school and maybe they don't feel safe because of it. I mean, it's always, I always remind parents, Bolingbrook High School specifically is the size of pretty much larger than pretty much any town south of 80 in Illinois,
That's
right?
true.
I mean, we've got nearly 4,000 students. So when you think of it that way, like there's going to be situations that require time and space, and that's why towns with 700 people in it south of 80 have, still have a police department, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
our school is bigger than that. So there's going to be times where we need to support students in different ways, and I think that's okay. One of the things you mentioned a little bit ago, if you don't mind, was,
Mm-hmm.
um, for kids staring at a wall, and is that going to work for them? Studies show that really those punitive measures, repetitive external suspension for students, or that detention where you stare at an X on a projector, that really only works for students who come from families and backgrounds that value education.
Mm-hmm.
So students who already have educated families, they themselves are students like you described yourself, or I would have described myself as a student. Like I cared about school, and my
Yes, you
family
did.
cared how I did in school, and I knew if I went home and didn't do good in school, it wasn't going to be good for me. And I understood that, but that was because that was my family's values, right? And that was your family's
Mm-hmm.
values, if I remember correctly. But a lot of our students, that isn't the family values. So for them, like taking away school, even to some of their parents, isn't something that they're going to be as concerned about, because education isn't their family's primary value set. So it's again meeting those families at where they're at.
No, absolutely. And again, if you're stuck in survival mode, or you have
Hmm.
family who, didn't graduate high school or go to college, things like that, that's not the most important thing to you. So you're there, you're school, you're filling a chair, doing what you have to do, but beyond that, other than just being there, what is the value of this whole experience. And I think that's where it's especially important too, that we're, at least being able to work on the social development and help them learn how to integrate with people. And speaking of, integration, I like how you talked about the reintegration, if a child is externally suspended and has to come back to school, having the parents meet, maybe meeting with the administrators, with the teacher, and what does that look like coming back in? That's a very anxiety provoking type
Yes.
situation. You think, there's enough stress going into school to begin with all the performance challenges you have, trying to do well in the classroom, fit in with your peers. But now here you've received some type of punishment. You're having to go back into the class and face that teacher you disappointed or maybe you don't get along with. And that can be challenging. And you can go back in there and continue to have issues with this instructor. However, I like the reintegration because that can help them be able to work through it, mediate it, if you will. Can you talk a little bit to what that looks like, or maybe some external resources you bring in to help with reintegration?
Sure. So, I mean, in house, we do quite a few meetings with staff and students so that students have a safe space to kind of talk to their teacher, and their teacher has an opportunity to talk to the student and also not have anything taken, the
Anxiety
wrong
provoking for the
way from a
teacher, too.
student.
Yes.
Right, right. So, I mean, we do a lot of that if something happens in the classroom or with a teacher. But our district does partner with several different organizations. Heart Grove is a counseling agency that does come in and provide support for our schools. Guiding Light is another agency that we work with for counseling. They come in and they'll supply students 1 hour a week. We work with Success Academy, Dr. Ingram here in town. He works through the courts and also through the schools. He does amazing work through his program. It's actually held, just down the street from here on Canterbury,
Mm-hmm.
3 evenings a week for some of our students who maybe need more intensive support. And then H2O has always been a huge program that partners with the schools. So all of those agencies kind of have their own feel. And so you can work with families and see which agency is maybe best
That makes sense.
to fit that student and their needs, because they all kind of have their own areas of specialty. Although they're all mental health, they're all supports. They each have sort of their own flair, I guess,
Oh,
and a
absolutely.
type of student or a type of student need that is their strong suit. So we're really fortunate that we have so many organizations to partner with.
Well, and the important thing with that too is that not everybody can be the expert of everything,
Right.
and I get a kick out of it too. Being a therapist here, I feel like I wear a lot of different hats. It's like in one hand I'm the educator, I'm your dietitian, nutritionist, I'm your accountant helping you balance your checkbook, I'm your employment coach helping you build your resume, get a job, and so on. But the reality is that the thing I'm expert at is counseling or counselor education and so on, working with the graduate students I do. So it's so important that if you have an area where it's not necessarily your competent point, to reach out to other people. I like how you stated as well that we have a variety of different partners we work with. It was fun too when I was working at Benedictine University, a small world. When I was at Benedictine in Lisle, I was actually field experience supervisor. So students who were doing their internship would come in and talk about the experience. And they had multiple students who were actually doing their internship in Valley View and working with the students and that. So to get to hear some of the stuff that was going on, and this was a few years ago at this point. I was like, wow, things have changed since I went to that
Right.
school. And hearing about these different organizations, but they do each bring a different flair. I think there is a counselor out there for everybody, and like we say, you don't need to wait till you get to a crisis point to see a counselor. Even if your life is good, you can go see a counselor to get it to an even better point. Go from surviving to thriving. But though there's a counselor out there for everybody, not every counselor is the best fit for everyone. So having those different options can be great, because some of them, they have different cultural diversity at the practice. Maybe they speak different languages. We know Bolingbrook being as diverse as it is, people are speaking many different languages. So it's going to be really important we have people who can speak the native tongue, because if English is a second language, it can be hard to understand those emotions and so on. We can have different practices with different age clinicians. That's one thing too. Although the interns may be a bit less experienced than some of our other counselors in that. Even at my practice, we have a gentleman who's 82, but our master's interns are 23, 24, 25. Though they have less experience, they're able to establish rapport and they can relate a lot easier to the 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old population,
Right.
and they like to have that fit. So it's really great to be able to have those meetings with these different practices, find the counselor best fit, and we're not, trying to force that theoretical square peg into the round hole, if you will.
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I think, we've had students, it's always great when you have students who have totally bought into the process. And I see more of that. The longer I've done this, the more that counseling has just become part of what we do with kids. The students start to buy in more, and they'll come and they'll say, listen, like, the counselor I had last year through Guiding Light, I really liked, and maybe that person's moved on or they're in a
Hmm.
different building now. And they'll go, but this one I'm just not connecting with as easily. And it's definitely no knock on that counselor, but it's really neat to have 15, 16-year-olds come to you and they've now acknowledged counseling is good for them. Not only have they acknowledged that, but they've acknowledged that they can advocate for themselves and say, listen, this isn't as comfortable as a fit for me as maybe the counselor I've had prior. And so to me, when I hear those things happening more often, it tells me that we've reached kind of a new playing field, so to speak, with students in the buildings, that they're just seeing this as part of what they should be doing to grow themselves for after high school.
And that's significant because one of the things we talked about as well, and what this show is about, notice how I talk about mental wellness instead of mental illness, really trying to destigmatize everything that we've got going on with mental health. And like we talked about earlier, some people come in, they have a negative thought about seeing a counselor because, well, if I see somebody, they're going to pathologize me. I don't have a diagnosis. And not everybody who comes into counseling has a diagnosis. But as well, different cultures do find it to be taboo to come in and talk about these problems. I had a previous guest, Dana Mondragon, and we were talking about the Hispanic population, and now it's completely taboo and actually goes against your family to come into a counseling session and talk about issues that are going on, within the family. And I know that, this is the same type of thing for Eastern cultures, the Asian populations, African American populations, and so on and so forth. Really, don't see why it would be beneficial to speak to people outside the family about these types of problems. And, from what it sounds like you're telling me, that there's been some advancement here with the students seeing the value of it, reaching out for the support, advocating for themselves, and so on. Are you recognizing that across cultures, or maybe are the parents responding differently since you've tried some of these different approaches?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, or so, I mean, as I mentioned before, I've been at the school 15 years. So, I mean, that's long enough to kind of see some trends ebb and flow. I would say that I'm seeing more families understand that the schools are trying to provide something during the school day that can support their child without them having to take off work or rush around to get them there after hours. I think the convenience of it that the district has provided has bridged some of that gap. And then, when I have a family who's hesitant, but obviously there's a need for the student, and sometimes it's just short term, like we've talked about before. But I always tell them, listen, like, you don't have to go and talk about your deepest, darkest family secrets. You don't have to
It's
air
true.
the dirty laundry, like, right? Like, I mean, I remember my own parents were always like, we don't air our dirty laundry. Happens in the house, stays in the house.
Many families are that
My
way.
parents were very big in that way. And I'm like, you don't have to go into like the deepest, darkest family secret. Just talk about this F you have in English class and what's preventing you from being successful there. Start there. You told me you don't know what you want to do, and you're a junior, you have no idea what you want to do in a year and a half. Talk to them about that. Start with something that's very basic that you yourself has identified you need help with, and let them try to help and guide you and talk you through that. And I think sometimes for kids, you start there and then it expands into something more, kind of naturally that
No,
way.
absolutely. So we have an organic type of process
Right.
that's going on. Touched a hot point for me a few moments ago when you were talking about the convenience of having these services at the school. The resources are coming outside in, having the group meetings there. The parents can come in, meet with the administrator, teacher, and so on. How often do I have parents who come in and maybe they have an adolescent with a drug problem, and they're up in arms. I can't believe this is happening to my child, and I don't use drugs and never use drugs. How is this going on with him? What's wrong with him? Just please help, please help. I'm willing to do absolutely anything. And, I'll do my initial assessment with the client and determine, okay, there's a very severe addiction that's going on, and this is going to warrant more than meeting me once a week for 53 minutes. Really what you need to consider here is going to be an intensive outpatient program, your child going to a program 5 days a week, 3 hours a day, on the weekends, going to see the counselor, having family sessions with you present. You know how many parents look at me and say, oh, well, I can't do that. I don't have the time. I work, I have my other children to focus. I can't possibly do that. And to that, I'm asking, well, you made a comment a moment ago before we started the session, you'd be willing to do anything for your child. And I understand work is important. I understand you have to focus on your other children. I'm not doubting that. But in order to help your child the way your child needs the help for this severe situation, you have to be involved. And that's one of the hardest things I have that's going on. And here, what you're telling me is what's going on in Bolingbrook High School and many similar districts, throughout the nation here, is that bringing the resources makes it much more convenient for the parents to be able to assist with their children.
It does, and obviously, I mean, we don't have a 3 hour a day program
Nor should you.
like maybe Linden Oaks would,
Hmm.
but Hartgrove does have day programs. So I mean, they could take a student that maybe is getting 1 hour a week and work with that family and determine that maybe they do need more intense needs, and then that support is already right there. It's hard with parents. I mean, obviously, we've had parents tell us the same things. I can't get my kid to this all the time. I've got 4 other children. I work 2 jobs, and they're taking care of their family by doing those things too, right? So it's helping those families find the balance they need to kind of support, like it's us supporting the family just as much as we're supporting the kid or the student.
Well, absolutely. And it all starts with the family. So being able to offer that, educate the family, provide as many resources as possible. Not necessarily like the word convenient, but it is something that makes it more convenient for the family, especially the ones who are having to work 2, 3 jobs and are working far away, traveling a lot, and don't necessarily have the means. Because the reality is, healthcare is expensive. We see a lot of it. You go get a surgery, you're paying a fortune for it. Medication co-pays are a lot, but so is mental health, unfortunately. And we just spoke in the last episode here about different aspects of healthcare, and if you can't afford a good quality insurance, some of the public aid is really difficult to find a
Right.
quality clinician or a program. People who need rehab are unable to get into the good programs and things like that. So being able to offer these services in the school as best as possible, having community connections where you're able to refer the students to different places, find a good family program for them to be able to work together, is absolutely fantastic. And that supports not only the child but the family members in every single way possible. I think that's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great process to go through with families. And I mean, I'm just a huge believer that in any community, the hub of the village, so to speak, are your religious organizations, um, your counseling organizations, and your schools. Like, ultimately, everybody in your community pretty much touches one of those supports within a town. So if you're offering all kinds of options for help out of your school systems or your local churches or things of that nature, you're more likely to have a community that can come together and feel supported. I think we're lucky enough to live in communities that do that.
No, we really are, and that's one of the things I've always loved about Bolingbrook, being somebody who's born and raised out here. It's similar with you. Bolingbrook motto, a place to grow, and it really is, and just so much has changed over all these years, and I'm so proud to be part of something that's ever so progressive, and I'm truly delighted with everything that you've done with Bolingbrook High School and so on. And I just hope that similar models to what you're offering are able to be replicated at other schools, and we know the more we do this, the more efficient we become, the lower cost it can be, easier to implement. We have the evidence basis and so on. So absolutely fantastic. Again, thank you so much for being a guest
Thanks for
on the
having
show. No, absolutely. It's been truly an honor and a delight. Great being able to catch up with you. And for all of you who've been watching, thank you very much for viewing the show. I hope you were able to get something out of this as well. As always, if you have any questions, comments, feedback, want to leave any type of comments, you can feel free to go to the Mental Health Matters page on Facebook or send me an email to dr.mgloviak@gmail.com. You also have some contact information for Dean Andrea Heil as well. So anything you need, please let us know. I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to speaking with you next time.